Well, Peter, some slight conflict of interest here between my interest in responding as fully as possible to these extremely useful and thoughtful comments, and interest of the audience in being able to engage in discussion. So I try to be relatively succinct, but I also try to cover what I think are the main points. So I begin with Tore. Well, I don't know where I currently stand in your pantheon, and I shall not ask you. But I'm pleased to hear that at least at some point I was up there. Well, there's a problem with reading my handwriting here. Well, first, let me just make a comment that goes to both of you. Namely, I don't think either of you really faced head-on my challenge about, except Bengt to some extent, about applicability to real live flesh and blood people of theories that impute to them calculations that they demonstrably do not have. Bengt did that towards the end by suggesting a fifth response to my criticism on the point of indeterminism, namely that no calculation is involved at all. It's simply a question of observing behavior and assuming that the behavior is consistent, generating a set of preferences and probabilities that will be that are consistent with that behavior. That was Frank Ramsey's contribution, and later reinvented, I suppose, by von Neumann and Morgenstern. Maybe that is the best version of the theory, but it's certainly the most austere version of the theory. And I'm not at all sure that we can bring that theory to bear on the large variety of contexts where rational choice theory is applied. For instance, can you really do Bayesian updating in that framework? Maybe you can. It's not clear to me that you can. I know that that's not the framework that economists use to study Bayesian updating. They seem to believe that there are such things as priors that exist as mental entities in the brains of the agents, and that they update as they get new information that also enters as a mental input. So I think in a purely static perspective, all the reveal preference theories, the Ramsey version, the Samuelson version, may be adequate, but I don't think they are adequate in a sort of very limited set of contexts. I don't think they are really applicable in game theory. Maybe they are. Game theorists never use reveal preferences, to my knowledge, or the Ramsey construction. So, as I said, maybe that's the best version of the theory, but it's also very austere. And I'm talking about explaining behavior. Explanations is causal explanation. That means that behavior must be explained in terms of antecedent states of the universe. And in this particular case, that means antecedent mental states. I think rational reconstruction of mental states on the basis of observed behavior doesn't amount to an explanation of that behavior. So that's just on this very general point. And Tore did not address what I think was and is my main criticism, this very, very boringly trivial objection. How come? You can't really believe that. That these are walking automata? We are not walking automata. It's nothing to do with irrationality, simply with limited cognitive capacity. Let me now, what I said about economists being best at predicting short-term effects of small changes referred explicitly to institutions like the Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, and so on. But let me take it a bit more broadly, as you did, in terms of the matching mechanisms. And maybe I could add, as did Ken Binmore in a comment he wrote on something I else have written in a similar vein, auction mechanisms. Economists have been pretty good at both designing matching mechanisms that work and auction mechanisms that work. And I know too little about these theories, but my suspicion is that these mechanisms don't presuppose that agents have unlimited computational capacities. I suspect, at least in the case of some of these matching mechanisms that I know something about, it's not that difficult. You don't have to impute, you have to be ingenious to create a system where the agents have incentives to choose in ways that are socially optimal. But their choices don't have to be based on very sophisticated calculations, nor on very complicated time discounting functions or whatever. So I don't think it's really a counterexample to anything I said, but I take your point, but I don't think it's a counterexample. Because I could have said more about the context in which one can apply the theory. Maybe I should have mentioned both matching mechanisms and auctions as examples. Although, if I remember correctly, George Meyerson got Nobel Prize for auction theory. If I remember correctly, his theory has never had any application. It was a pure theory. Very beautiful, I'm sure, but as far as I've been told, second-hand knowledge again, not with any applications. Now, well, okay, so I should not only take the best objects of criticism, but the most up-to-date object of criticism. So 2004, that's all hat. So I really should have aimed at 2012. Now, the book by Duflo that I read, co-authored with Chatterjee, right? Poor Economics. Banerjee. Yeah. Banerjee, yeah. That's 2011. Is that up to date enough for you? Okay. She makes the following argument at one point in the book. She observes an interesting fact about how when people emigrate from a certain region in India, they don't go to the region sort of next door, but they move a bit further away. Now, when there is a very bad drought or excessive rainfall or whatever, then these distant relatives can help them, precisely because they're not affected by the same meteorological phenomena. And they claim, I think, that explains that pattern. The beneficial effects of not one-step moves, but two-step moves explains the two-step moves. That's sort of pure functionalism. So that's not good science in my book. But rational choice functionalism is pervasive in economics. The Becker-Mulligan piece on endogenous time preferences, just rational choice functionalism with no really reliable micro foundations. And I won't even, so if the flaw is the gold standard, well, I'm not completely convinced, at least on the basis of that book, which otherwise is a wonderful book, wonderful. But it's a sort of mental habit. When you see that something is beneficial for someone or something, the economist's reflex, just as it used to be the sociologist's reflex, is to assume that those benefits explain the behavior we observe. Well, financial crisis. Well, I think it's true that some of the managers of financial firms told their clients that our models tell us that the disastrous crisis will only occur 1 in a million years, or even larger time spans. And then the crisis did. And they also told them that I think that we have models that show that this is very unlikely. And then it happened. Of course, this could be 1 in 1 million years. That is one possibility, but a very unlikely one. So there are several possibilities. One is the managers didn't believe in the models because they knew that if something went wrong, they would be bailed out. So they didn't have any skin in the game. That is one possibility. The other possibility is that the managers did believe in the models. They thought that the models were so sophisticated that and robust that they could reliably predict that major breakdowns were unlikely. As you know, and as we know, lots of people said that the problem of recessions and depression had been solved, was behind us, wouldn't happen again. Lucas said that in 2003, Bernanke said that in 2005, whatever. So lots of people said that. And now, I would assume that quite a few people acted on those strong statements and took risks that they shouldn't have taken. And I think a theory that may be at fault here, the Scholes theorem and Eco's lemma, all of that is vastly too complicated for me. But the theory of efficient markets is at least somewhat intelligible to me, and it seems that that is clearly an inadequate theory for the reasons pointed out by Grossman and Stiglitz in 1980, and never fully, as far as I can see, internalized by the believers in efficient markets. So basically they show that unless there are, anyway, well, that's why I cannot really either explain the causal link between the financial theories and the collapse of long-term capital management. Who believed what and acted on what beliefs? But it seems to me that the originators of the theory, at least one of whom I think was in the management of LTMC, believed in the theory's accuracy in ways that were not justified, and therefore caused lots of people to lose their money. But as I said in the beginning of my talk, the causal aspect, the harm aspect of this was not really my main concern today, because I think those issues are just very hard, and I think you probably would have a very detailed micro knowledge of exactly what was going on at the time to be able to answer those causal questions. I think maybe, well, I think in the case of managers who told their clients, our models tell us that disasters won't happen. Either they were rational but lied, or they were irrational and truthful. I don't know which theory we should prefer, but it might be possible that they were just irrational and rational and lied, didn't believe the theory because they knew they didn't have any skin in the game, and that the government would pick up the bill if something went wrong. I'm spending too much time here. Let me say something to yes. I have to ask Tore a personal question, since we are both Norwegians. You mentioned with respect to Germany, something about painting, right? Hitler and painting?
Nazism and painting.
Nazism and painting.
I didn't mention Hitler.
But yeah, but painting. And my father wrote a short story once called Responsibility of Art Academies. It's a science fiction story in which Hitler was admitted to the Art Academy in Vienna and turned out to be a widely successful, popular painter, hitting the bad taste of the general public with unerring precision. And so that's the responsibility of art. Well, you weren't referring to that story, were you?
No, I was not.
No.
I love to lie at this point. I'm such a bad liar.
Well, I think this scapegoating is also a bit overdone. I don't think Keynes was scapegoating anyone. You know, he observed correctly, I think history now acknowledges, the fixed mindset of economists of his day, and he saw correctly how that fixed mindset was leading economy into a disaster, and he spoke out. I don't think scapegoating was at all the would it be at all the appropriate term? Of course, if you are criticized, that's a very natural response to say, oh, you are just looking for a scapegoat for something that went bad. Well, sometimes that's true, but one shouldn't infer from the fact that A is criticizing B for something that went wrong, that A is just searching for a scapegoat. A might actually have intellectual, respectable reasons for criticizing B. So I think scapegoating is... not remember which glass is mine here. Well.
Well, it's not mine. I have mine here.
Okay, then okay. So I think that, let me put it a different way. If there's I'm putting my reputation on the line here, right? By talking about things I know basically little about. So it's a gamble from my point of view. I'm sufficiently convinced that there's something seriously wrong with the social sciences to take on the role of an outsider critic, knowing that I may look like a fool and fall flat on my face and lose my reputation, but that's a gamble I'm taking. So it's not really that I'm concerned with scapegoating anyone. It's that I think I see a serious problem out there. And I'm sufficiently convinced that maybe something to what I'm saying, that I'm taking the risk of denouncing it. That's how it feels like to me, at least. Now, to Bengt. Well, by the way, well, no, I shouldn't get. I have some technical comments to something Tore said, but I'll skip that. Well, it's interesting what Bengt said, that what you really want to do is to study behavior shielded from influences that might cause actors to deviate from what rationality tells them to do. Because there is, of course, a branch of economics doing exactly that, experimental economics. They try to create very artificial conditions in which interaction is anonymous, often not iterated. So eliminate all the effects that arise in either face-to-face interactions or in iterated games and so on, to see how people behave in one-shot situations under conditions of anonymity. And they don't behave as a rational choice theory tells. As a massive, massive theory, replicated a zillion times, they don't behave like that. So it's not a question of shielding them. And I think many people, like Charlie Plott, who tried to refute these theories experimentally, ended up saying, in the case, I think, of preference reversal, that they couldn't refute it experimentally. The facts were just too hard. So I think if it were that simple, that you could isolate individuals from passions, cognitive biases induced by external factors and so on, and then verify that they do indeed behave as rational choice theory tells them to do, then, well, that would be fine, but that's not how it is. There are people who claim that's the case. Ken Binmore claims that's the case, that if you just do the experiments properly and let people get the chance to learn, their rational self-interest will come dominate in the long run. But I don't think that's anything like the consensus of the majority of behavioral economists. Well, about soft obscurantists, well, they obviously have less potential, at least, for doing harm than hard obscurantists. Whether they're bracketing the actual amount of harm that the hard obscurantists do, the soft have much less potential, although some potential. I would say the culture of suspicion generated by psychoanalysis in our culture is a very bad thing, has very bad effects. But that's relatively minor, perhaps, compared to other things. But the problem is to say you can't argue with soft obscurantists. It's impossible. They don't know what an argument is. The only way you can hurt them is by making them shoot themselves in the foot, as Alan Sokal did in his famous hoax, where he got published an article called towards a hermeneutic theory of quantum gravity in a well-known postmodernist journal, a piece of complete nonsense that was published and then, of course, revealed as a hoax. So, but that you can only do once, because I think editorial boards are more careful these days. So you cannot make them shoot themselves in the foot one more time. So I think the situation is hopeless. You know, the soft obscurities are there. They have arguments, citation counts, and so on that universities, departments have to accept, because who can say that they are wrong? There's no super authority. You know, there's no Bengt Hansson who can be the arbiter at the last instance. So I think we just have to live with the fact that there is a vast amount, quantitatively speaking, in some countries, a vast amount of soft obscurantist work that will just persist. And with respect to my country, I think it's increasing, which is I find very, very disturbing. To Norway, but I don't know how it is in Sweden. Okay, so I'll stop there.